All right, you're back for our read aloud, and I'm going to be reading Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Louis Sugar. I think that's how you say his name. Looks like Secor, but I think it's like Sugar. All right, so this book is pretty funny, and I read it every year to my third graders. So I'm going to go ahead and read maybe one, maybe two chapters, and you can go ahead and do your work if you want to, or you can paint or draw or color or just relax and listen. Enjoy the Wayside School. So this picture here is going to go with chapter 1. So let's start reading it so we can find out why we see this picture. All right, so the first page says Introduction. This book contains 30 stories about the children and teachers at Wayside School. But before we get to them, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. Wayside School was accidentally built sideways. It was supposed to be only 1 story high, with 30 classrooms in a row, like our school. Instead, it is 30 stories high, with classrooms all in a row, with 1 classroom on each story. The builder said he was very sorry. The children at Wayside like having a sideways school. They have an extra large playground. So because the school doesn't take up all of the land, they have a big playground. The children and teachers described in this book all go to class on the top floor. That would be the 30th floor. So there are 30 stories from the 30th story of Wayside School. So the 30th floor of Wayside School. Okay. It has been said that these stories are strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I told stories about you to the children at Wayside, they thought you were strange and silly. That is probably also true. Chapter 1. Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. If you children are bad, she warned, or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Mrs. Gorf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count. But he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Mrs. Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. Hey, that isn't fair, said Todd. John was only trying to help a friend. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. Does anybody else have an opinion? She asked. Nobody said a word. Mrs. Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. I do not allow crying in the classroom, said Mrs. Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet, and when they went home, they were too scared to even talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Mrs. Gorf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say, so she turned them all into an apple and they couldn't leave. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Mrs. Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, "God bless you," when Paul sneezed, and Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Terence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Mauricia tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Mrs. Gorf's right ear began to wiggle. Then she reached the door. Mrs. Gorf's left ear wiggled. Mauricia opened the door and had one foot outside. When Mrs. Gorf stuck out her tongue, Mauricia became an apple. Mrs. Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. The 3 Erics laughed. They were turned into apples. Mrs. Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Terence, Nancy, Mauricia, and the 3 Erics, which are Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. Louis, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Mrs. Gorf was a mean teacher. So he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. I must be wrong, he thought. She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples. So he went back down to the playground. The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Louis, the yard teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in the class. She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all of the children were apples. Mrs. Gorf was very happy. "Now I can go home," she said. "I don't have to teach any more. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again." "You're not going anywhere," shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Mrs. Gorf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed. Mrs. Gorf fell on the floor. The apples jumped all over her. "Stop!" she shouted, "or I'll turn you into applesauce." But the apples didn't stop, and Mrs. Gorf could do nothing about it. "Turn us back into children," Todd demanded. Mrs. Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, wiggled her ears. This time, her first one was her left ear, then her right, and turned the apples back into children. Oh, I got tongue-tied there, sorry. "All right," said Mauricia, "let's go get Louis. He'll know what to do." "No!" screamed Mrs. Gorf. "I'll turn you back into apples." She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, and stuck out her tongue. But Jenny held up a mirror, and Mrs. Gorf turned herself into an apple. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. Even though Mrs. Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple, but none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. "Where's Mrs. Gorf?" he asked. Nobody said a word. "Boy, am I hungry," said Louis. "I don't think Mrs. Gorf would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many." He picked up the apple, which was really Mrs. Gorf, shined it up on his shirt, and then ate it. All right, the next chapter that we're going to do is about Mrs. Jules. And so this was about the best picture I could find online, so you could look at it. Mrs. Jules had a terribly nice face. She stood at the bottom of Wayside School and looked up. She was supposed to teach the class on the 30th story. The children on the 30th story were scared. They had never told anybody what had happened to Mrs. Gorf. They hadn't had a teacher for 3 days. They were afraid of what their new teacher would be like. They had heard she'd be a terribly nice teacher. They had never had a nice teacher. They were terribly afraid of nice teachers. Mrs. Jules walked up the winding, creaking staircase to the 30th story. She was also afraid. She was afraid of the children. She had heard that they would be horribly cute children. She had never taught cute children. She was horribly afraid of cute children. So I don't know if you can see the picture in the book, but that's the way it looks in the book. So that's about the closest picture I could find about her. All right. She opened the door to the classroom. She was terribly nice. The children could tell just by looking at her. Mrs. Jules looked at the children. They were horribly cute. In fact, they were much too cute to be children. I don't believe it, said Mrs. Jules. It's a room full of monkeys. This is ridiculous, said Mrs. Jules. Just ridiculous. I walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing but a class of monkeys? What do they think I am? I'm a teacher, not a zookeeper. The children looked at her. They didn't know what to say. Todd scratched his head. Oh, I'm sorry, said Mrs. Jules. Please don't get me wrong. I have nothing against monkeys. I really do like monkeys. It's just that I was expecting children. I like them. I really do. Why, I'm sure we can play all kinds of monkey games. What are you talking about? Asked Todd. Mrs. Jules nearly fell off her chair. Well, what do you know? A talking monkey. Tomorrow I'll bring you a banana. My name is Todd, said Todd. The children were flabbergasted. They all raised their hands. I'm sorry, said Mrs. Jules, but I don't have enough bananas for all of you. I didn't expect this. Next week I'll bring a whole bushel. I don't want a banana, said Calvin. I'm not a monkey. Would you like a peanut? Asked Mrs. Jules. I think I might have a bag of peanuts in my purse. Wait a second. Yes, here it is. Thanks, said Calvin. Calvin liked peanuts. Allison stood up. I am not a monkey, she said. I am a girl. My name is Allison, and so is everybody else. Mrs. Jules was shocked. Do you mean to tell me that every monkey in here is named Allison? No, said Jenny. She means we are all children. My name is Jenny. No, said Mrs. Jules. You're much too cute to be children. Jason raised his hand. Yes, said Mrs. Jules. The chimpanzee in that red shirt. My name is Jason, said Jason, and I am not a chimpanzee. Well, you're too small to be a gorilla, said Mrs. Jules. I'm a boy, said Jason. You're not a monkey? Asked Mrs. Jules. No, said Jason. And the rest of the class, they're not monkeys either? Asked Mrs. Jules. No, said Allison. That is what we've been trying to tell you. Are you sure? Asked Mrs. Jules. We would know if we were monkeys, wouldn't we? Asked Calvin. Well, I don't know, said Mrs. Jules. Do monkeys know that they are monkeys? I don't know, said Allison. I'm not a monkey. No, I suppose you're not, said Mrs. Jules. Okay, in that case, we have a lot of work to do. Reading, writing, subtraction, addition, spelling. Everybody take out a piece of paper. We will have a test right now. Jason tapped Todd on the shoulder. He said, Do you want to know something? I liked it better when she thought we were monkeys. I know, said Todd. I guess now it means she won't be bringing me a banana. There will be no talking in class, said Mrs. Jules. She wrote Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. So you will get to know these characters, and you'll get to know what the board is all about with discipline. All right, I hope that you guys enjoyed our story, Sideways Stories from Wayside School. I will read 2 more chapters the next time we have class, which will be again on Tuesday. So make sure that you head over to reading and answer your question of the day. There is not one in math, but do your question in reading. And I hope you guys enjoyed your story, and I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend if I don't talk to you before then. All right, guys. Great job.